Okay, hello everybody, Zeno here, and this is like my 12th freaking attempt on trying to find a way to streamline this, but this video is going to be all about game install sizes, and the only reason why this popped up into my head is because the newest game that pretty much just came out like an hour ago at the time of me making this video, 9/11, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the reboot. The install size for that game is huge, and it made me really think, what the hell happened to like games this generation in terms of install size? Because like we hit a couple like notches, and then all of a sudden they just burst open they just let all hell break loose and let the install sizes go skyrocket high, and the games are never compressed and things like that. So this video I'm going to talk about stuff like that, and I'm going to dive right on in because we're going to go through a little bit of history. So if this isn't your kind of video, I apologize, but we're gonna dive right on in. Let me do my little transition thing here, and we're gonna start off by going through the entire generation of video game history all the way up to modern. And I only have a couple examples for the first few generations, but then it ramps up in more detail on how these things go. You can just listen to what I'm gonna say, or you can read and follow along with my Microsoft Word document. But basically, we're just going to talk about how much and how like rampant games installation sizes are. And I'm trying to focus on AAA-ish games, but you'll see a couple oddities here and there. But here we go. So the first generation was the games like the Magnavox Odyssey. They're mostly pre-built games. We have really no idea how big those games are. I've never really researched on figuring out how big they were to emulate and stuff like that, so I just put not applicable. But obviously they can't be very complicated games, so they're not very big. Moving on to the second generation of video games, my two examples here are Pitfall and Asteroids for the Atari 2600. And as you can see for the size here, Pitfall is about 4 kilobytes in size, which is as much as the Atari 2600 can manage in one memory bank for a cartridge. So that made sense for them to limit their game to 4 kilobytes. And that is actually going to be a very big consistent thing. Consistent thing you're going to hear me say across this video. A lot of games are actually restricted on what medium they were installed on. Like N64 games will have a set like install limit. Games on a CD will have a set install size limit and stuff like that. So just be prepared for that. But moving on to Asteroids, the size is 6 kilobytes, and that's actually pretty interesting because one, it came out before Pitfall, and two, even though the Atari 2600 couldn't manage 6 kilobytes, they actually did this cool like little technical trick that let them switch memory banks and load the game at different intervals, so you can actually have bigger games than what the Atari 2600 was originally designed for. So games like on the 2600 actually could probably get bigger to like 32 kilobytes to probably, there's a theoretical maximum, but there technically can't be a limit. So if you knew how to program right for the Atari 600, you can make pretty big games. But if we move on to the third generation, my couple examples here are on the NES, and games like Tetris and Super Mario Brothers jumped up dramatically in terms of install size, or cartridge ROM size, I should probably say, where it was almost like a 3 times jump, where games like that would get a lot more colorful, there would be a lot more graphics, there's a lot more going on. Games like Tetris ended up being like 27 kilobytes, Super Mario Brothers 33. I don't have it on the list here, but a game near the end of the NES lifespan, like Mario Brothers 3, I think I heard got almost bigger than a megabyte, which was huge for the 80s. So, there's a big old jump there in scale. If we move on to the fourth generation, things didn't get too much bigger. I don't really have any SNES examples because I'm really going off of games I've played or I own that I can easily pull the size install from. So my examples here are Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, and those games are actually pretty small because I guess they had a really good way of compressing the game or fitting it all into a small cartridge space. Sonic 2 only ended up being a megabyte, which is almost as big as Mario Brothers 3. It's pretty amazing. Sonic the Hedgehog 3, its sequel, didn't get too much bigger, but technically that game is split off into 2 separate parts, and that was probably their way to get around developing limitations on the Sega Genesis. Now, if we hop over to the 5th generation of consoles, this is where stuff gets really interesting because the console like the N64 and the PlayStation their mediums changed for how they distribute their games differ greatly. Like on this list here, Super Mario 64. It was a cartridge-based game. It was a pretty fun and jam-packed game with a lot of content, and they managed to cram it all into 8 megabytes, if I recall correctly, because I have the ROM. Shh. I own the game like 50 times, but I have the ROM. So, that's pretty amazing. And you go look at another game like Ocarina of Time. That actually jumped up dramatically in size to about 32 megabytes, and that was a really big game for an N64 game. And I think I've heard N64 games are theoretical size maximums or 64 megabytes, which is pretty funny considering the fact that it's called the Nintendo 64. Not for that reason. But if you go over to the PlayStation side of games like Legend of Legaia, which is a really long RPG, the game is 455 megabytes, which is huge and a huge jump compared to something like Mario 64. But that's also because they were allowed to utilize a lot more space. They had CDs, which could hold up to, I think, 700 megabytes. So they had a lot of room to play with for the time in the 90s for these games in terms of install size. And there are even other ways to make games even bigger, like The Legend of Dragoon, for example, which was actually 4 discs for one game of 4 CDs. So they were actually able to make that game almost 2.2 gigabytes in installation, which is way bigger than what you would see in a PlayStation 1 era kind of game. Another example I have from further back then in the PlayStation era was Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, which is about 505 megabytes. Again, kind of hitting that CD maximum limit there, but they were able to cram more geometric models, shapes, sprites, and just a whole bunch of other text detail and images and all that stuff. They utilized it to as much as they could. And if we jump over to the 6th generation of video games, this is where like things get even more interesting, because now we're hitting like a constant maximum. And it's going to be a poor example for the first few examples I have here, but you'll see how things switch up real quickly near the end. So the first 6th generation console game that everybody knows was the Dreamcast, and the way they had their version of their CD-ROMs or DVD-ROMs or whatever they called it. I think they're called GD-ROMs. Games like Sonic Adventure really were only able to be like about a gigabyte big. They had to compress the game massively to get that game on there. So if we go from there to like the GameCube had a similar CD size. It was small, and they had to compact it as much as they could into like a DVD style format for very tiny CDs. Their theoretical maximums were 1.4 gigabytes. And that was pretty much every single GameCube game, because any game that was ported to like the PlayStation 2 or Xbox, those games were designed with DVDs in mind, not mini DVDs, which had a theoretical maximum of 4.7 gigabytes. So any game that was ported to the GameCube had to be crushed and compressed into 1.4 gigabytes, which apparently was possible. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. So games like Soul Calibur 2 would have to be like crammed back into 1.4 gigabytes to fit on the GameCube to release it on that console. And that's just one point that I'm saying that's what they should be doing with some of these games today. But moving on further in the 6th generation of consoles to like the PS2, Kingdom Hearts, 3 gigabytes. They tried to utilize as much as they could of that DVD-ROM so they could cram a lot of content and detail into the games as much as they could, and higher quality audio and all stuff like that. I'm going to skip ahead a couple games here. Games like Grand Theft Auto 3 was an early release title too, just like Kingdom Hearts was, and they were only able to use 1.56 gigabytes, which almost could have fit on a GameCube when you really think about it if they just did a little bit of tweaking. Another game was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which used 3.22 gigabytes. Again, that was a good portion of that DVD. Pretty amazing. Now, I don't really have any Xbox titles, but again, the theoretical maximum for a lot of these games is actually like 8 gigabytes, because the way DVDs are structured, you can do single layer discs and dual layer discs, but a lot of the early PS2 games and GameCube didn't do it, and Xbox games didn't really use that because I think the technology wasn't there at the time. But the technology was there for the 7th generation of consoles, and the first game I'm going to dive into is COD 4. Now, this is the PC version of the install size, but it's basically like the maximum install size you could have probably for the 360 version or something. But Call of Duty 4 was 8 gigabytes. Again, that's about a doubling in size for a video game of this era. 8 gigabytes was a lot of theoretical maximums. But if we jump over to the Wii side, Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, 4.6 or 4.7 gigabytes. And on the list here, you can almost, pretty much, I got lazy and said almost all Xbox 360 and Wii games were 4.7 gigabytes to 8.1 because they decided to either install the game on a single layer DVD or a dual layer DVD. But if we move over to the PlayStation 3, they used Blu-ray discs, which actually had theoretical install size limits of 25 gigabytes. So developers had plenty of room to cram whatever they wanted into the game over the development. But a lot of the time they were restricted because a lot of those multi-platform games actually held back. They were designed with the Xbox 360 and the PS3 in mind, so they kind of had like this weird imbalance of how much they could cram into a game. And a good example of this would be Sonic Unleashed for the PS3. It used 7.63 gigabytes, which is pretty, it's pretty well crammed in there. And especially if you compare it to a game like Zero Gravity, it's about double the size, but it has things of much higher detail and much higher fidelity of everything, and that still fits onto an Xbox 360 game disc. Even though they used the PS3 as probably a base to develop the game, 8 gigabytes is barely anything for that, and you could all play that from the disc. If we jump over to Modern Warfare 2, I think this has a lot of the DLC in it, but it is my PC release. I'm going off a lot of my Steam installation folders. You're going to see it a lot more here in a little bit. But Modern Warfare 2 was 12 gigabytes with most of the DLC. That is another huge jump, especially compared to Call of Duty 4. Of course, they did a lot of engine upgrades and stuff, which do take up space because they have to figure out ways to calculate better lighting, how they do reflection materials and stuff like that. And a lot of that stuff we still have today, but we don't really have games near as big as that with a lot of the same features. Halo Reach had to fit into a dual-layer DVD, so they made their game almost barely 7 gigabytes. And a lot of the DLC came after that, where you can store it on your handy-dandy Xbox hard drive. So that was a lot of ways developers got around install limits, was to make as much as they could for the disc for the consumer, and then any extra content they would add on later through a storage medium. And a lot of the content for Reach came out and made the game a little bit bigger, probably around 10 gigabytes by the end of its lifespan. And I never really owned any PS3 games, so might be a little off. But The Last of Us was it was one of the last PS3 games to come out, major PS3 games to come out, and that utilized almost every single byte of that Blu-ray disc. They crammed so much of game into that, and it ended up being 26 gigabytes. That's actually more than freaking what the Blu-ray disc had. This is the time where you would download it, it would be missing probably a couple things, and you would have to download an update through the internet to finish the game. This is going to become a huge trend in current titles today, which actually can be a problem, especially if you don't have internet. But if we're going to skip over to the 8th generation of consoles, this is where things get a little tricky, because a lot of games have different install sizes for different consoles and all over the place for stuff like that. Grand Theft Auto 4 on the PS4 is a 44 gigabyte game. That is huge. Grand Theft Auto 5 is huge. In fact, if we go to the Grand Theft Auto 5 on the 360, because that's where it originally came out in, it actually had a completely different install disc. They had more than 2 discs you had to install onto your hard drive to even play the damn game, which is insane. And if you move over to the Grand Theft Auto 5 on PC release, it actually is double the freaking size. You'd think it's the same game. Technically, it plays the same way. The install size wouldn't be that much different, but apparently higher fidelity textures, higher fidelity shaders take up tons and tons and tons of space, therefore doubling the installation size to freaking 86 gigabytes. That is nuts. It is one of the most played games in current, everybody still plays it today. That's why I'm trying to keep this list, especially for modern titles, popular ones for today. If we move over to the Switch, which is actually very interesting considering it's a mobile console, And I never really put mobile consoles on this list because their storage medium is way different. This is going to be quite an exception because actually a lot of games on the Switch are utilizing almost all of this storage possible. Games like Breath of the Wild, after all the DLC, take about 14 gigabytes, which isn't too bad, especially with how much game there is. I think there's a lot of compression going on still there and there, but that's what I would call a medium-sized game. That's a AAA game, though, from Nintendo, 14 gigabytes. That's pretty small if you jump from some game like Grand Theft Auto 5 or The Last of Us. This game is smaller. Smash Bros. Ultimate is another huge game with tons of characters, tons of stages, tons of music, tons of just everything, and they still managed to cram that game into 16 gigabytes with its current patch at the making of this video. That's a lot smaller still than The Last of Us, and to a certain degree, that's a lot of content, too, for 16 gigabytes. They obviously are doing some sort of compression in there to get that game to fit into a smallest form possible. That's pretty interesting. If we jump over to a current game like Rainbow Six Siege that still gets constant updates, that game just hit 70 gigabytes as the making of this video. It could be getting even bigger with more characters over time and stuff. That game, it really boggles my mind how a game can get that big because there's only so many maps in the game. There's only so many characters in the game. There's only so many skins. There's only so many weapons, etc., etc. You really think about it, there's no campaign for this game. How the hell is this 70 gigabytes? What the hell is taking up all that space? A lot of that stuff doesn't add up. All the textures aren't the highest resolutions ever. In fact, there's even a Ultra HD pack you can download that I don't have downloaded for this. That's almost as big as the damn game itself. That could double the installation size easily to 110 gigabytes or more. And this is just a multiplayer only game. That is huge. If you go from a game from like Grand Theft Auto 5, which is a huge open world with multiplayer and single player and tons of cutscenes and tons of dialogue and tons of textures and all that stuff, this doesn't make any sense. The game is technically not really bigger, but it's for how much content you get. I mean, replayability is a completely different argument. That is like almost double the amount in size, especially if you were to go... I mean, Grand Theft Auto 5 is still a bigger game, granted, but with the amount of things you can do Grand Theft Auto versus things you can do in Rainbow Six, the size doesn't really justify it. Now, I can go in a completely different argument about that game, but let's move on to another game. PUBG is one of the most popular games in the world still, especially in Asia. That game is an Unreal 4 game, and it's only taking up 30 gigabytes for the PC release. Now, this kind of makes more sense because it's a multiplayer-only game. There's not a lot of single-player stuff you can do. I don't think there's any, actually. There are a bunch of big maps that you can play on that have tons of models, tons of textures, and then there's tons of guns, there's tons of skins. This game is actually pretty well crammed for the amount of content it has, especially compared to like something like Rainbow Six. Now, there isn't as much fidelity, unfortunately, but that, I bet, could actually play on like the PS3 if you tweaked it right. That's a pretty good install size. They did a good job there. You jump to another AAA developer like Respawn Entertainment, Titanfall 2. That game, after all of its DLC at the end of its lifespan, was 63 gigabytes. That's fucking huge. Now, granted, this game does have a single-player campaign. It does have tons of maps. It does have tons of different kinds of play styles. You can hop in a damn Titan, for God's sake. You can play on the ground. They have to account for a lot of detail on the ground and a lot of detail that you look out into the distance when you're a big-ass freaking Titan. This kind of makes sense. In fact, I can't remember how big Titanfall 1 was, but when I first downloaded that back on the Xbox One ages ago, the game was huge. And that was a multiplayer-only game. It was like 40 gigs or something, 30, 40 gigs, which is an astronomical jump when you play a game like Black Ops 1 for 1 year. You play Black Ops 2 the next, and then you're like, ooh, the Xbox One came out. Let's play these games. And all of a sudden, the install freaking size jumps up to 90. It's baffling. Anyway, enough of that ranting. Moving on to Final Fantasy 15 for the Windows version. That game is 86 gigs. That is nuts. Open world, giant-ass RPG. Yeah, there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of fidelity. There's a lot of textures. 86 gigabytes doesn't really sound that bad. I don't know how long the game is because I still haven't beat it, but that is freaking nuts. Whoa. I don't know if you could justify 86 gigabytes of that, but that's insane. You play a game like Assassin's Creed, which had to fit into a 360 game, that's like a 16th of that size, and you're probably almost getting just as much game if you really think about it. That's really weird. Moving on to another game that everybody hated and now kind of likes is No Man's Sky. At its current patch, it's only 9 gigabytes. Whoa, that is actually pretty mind-blowing because, I mean, it's a procedurally generated game. It's online, mostly online only as far as I know. I've played a couple hours in it. That's pretty good. It has to generate tons of textures for plants and random creatures and, you know, all the animations, different planets, different NPCs, different ships, different asteroids, aliens. It does a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff for 9 gigabytes, especially for today. And the kind of detail it has. It has a lot of tessellation features, which probably take up a lot of space in terms of creating texture maps for it to be able to do that tessellation, which is complicated stuff, obviously, but that is impressive for 9 gigabytes for the amount of stuff you can do in that game. That is good. Yeah, especially since it's a crafting game now. You know, you can build your own houses, you can collect materials and stuff like that. That's not a bad size, especially to a game compared to a game like Ark, which isn't on this list. That game's 100 gigabytes minimum these days, and that's pretty sad. But if we jump over to another 8th generation game, Battlefield 4 was like a launch title for this generation. And after all the DLC, for the PC version anyway, that amounts to 70 fucking gigabytes. That is insane for a 2014 game. And oops, I apologize for doing that. If you compare that to Battlefield 5, Battlefield 5 I don't even think even hits that yet. And I know there's technically way less content in Battlefield 5. And this is before the Pacific patch, which comes out in about a week. But that's nuts. That's insane. I know they have tons of maps and tons of guns, but they don't have a lot of the advanced new upgrade features the Frostbite engine and stuff has. But that is huge. I don't know if they're compressing anything like that, but they managed to cram Battlefield 4 into the 360 and PS3. I don't know how much they install in that game with DLC. I'm guessing it's probably somewhere in the 20 gigabyte range, but that is still insane for a 2014 game. 2013 game, technically. Moving on to Halo 5. This one, I have to take a moment for that. This is an Xbox One only game. This was designed originally for the base Xbox One. So this is like designed for a game, I mean, a console that had like the graphics capability of something like a 750 Ti. This game is 100 gigabytes. Now, I haven't played Halo 5 since it came out, so this install size was a lot smaller back then. It was about 50, but today's current freaking DLC and all that stuff, that is huge. I'm not one to have a lot of storage, especially since mechanical storage is a lot slower these days. You can get a lot of mechanical storage for cheap, but you're not going to want it because you're going to want to load the game as fast as possible. 100 gigabytes is going to be a lot to load, especially if you're playing this game all the damn time. Downloading it itself is going to take a lot if you don't have premium internet, which I know isn't a common thing in the United States. Ow. Halo 5. That's all I have to say. Ow. Gears 5 just came out a while ago. 62 gigabytes on the Xbox One version. It's 72 for PC. That's pretty damn big. It's an Unreal Engine 4 game. A lot of detail there. A lot of cutscenes. That's almost respectable. But now we finally get to Call of Duty. Call of Duty Modern Warfare on the PC. And if I gotta say right now, anybody who's still listening to my stupid voice rant about sizes in video games, almost 25 minutes in, I thank you. You are the MVP, because holy crap, I don't know how somebody could be listening to me for this long, but here we are. Call of Duty Modern Warfare on the PC was going to be rated to download at 175 gigabytes. That is already double the amount of normal games we're getting today, and those are on the high end. Holy shit. That is huge. This only makes me scared for how big games are going to be in the next generation, because that there better be a lot of content in this game, because that is huge. That is just humongous. I mean, size doesn't really accommodate for how much fun you're going to get in a game, but when people only get so fast internet speeds, you would think they would still take into account some compression methods and stuff like this. I feel like this is just like the raw game. They're just throwing it at you, even though they have to encrypt it and make it so it's a lot harder to hack and get the textures and models and not to cheat in it. But that's astronomical. I know we've been talking about different sizes doubling over time, but this I feel like is a little too... This is way too early to double in size again, because we're hitting a spot where the internet isn't even... Our internet speeds aren't even capable of catching up to download these at reasonable times. Now, I don't exactly remember what the internet was like speed-wise in 2009, 2008, but I know people were starting to be capable of streaming 720p, which could download 8 gigabyte games in an hour or so. Or two, it wouldn't take that long. But when games today, with people's common internet speeds, I do have a little bit faster internet speeds, but not by a lot. But a game like this is going to take a couple fucking days to download. And I think at that point, if a game's going to take a couple days to download, we're going to need to slow down on how big games are getting. Because now that the fact that we're getting Blu-ray discs that are 50, 25, or even like 100 gigabyte sizes, we should be hitting those thresholds. But since everything has updates all the time, and we have hard drive spaces, mechanical hard drives that are slow as F, people just throw that limit out of the window, and I guess we're just going balls to the wall. So prepare for the 9th generation of video games to just be probably around this size in general. Like, that is nuts. I had a couple other examples on here. Like, I tried to do some research before I did this video, like right here. 72.92 gigabytes. I had a whole bunch of games on my Steam library. Doom is 70. Xenoverse 2 on PC, 20 gigabytes. There's a lot of difference in content there. It's just, it's completely nuts with how games are developed these days, because it's almost making it like games have to be like 20 gigabytes minimum with how their engines are compiled and how the shaders are loaded and how the post-processing effects are done in real time. It's baffling, because I know with 4K gaming being a thing, textures are going to matter more than ever. But I've never seen any texture with high enough fidelity to accommodate for that 4K screen, even though games are getting 50 times the freaking install size. It's just something that doesn't make sense. And I know I'm actually getting to the rant point at the end of my fucking video, which I should have been doing at the beginning. But we gotta slow down. 'Cause this is sad. I mean, when the 80 gigabyte like PS3 model came out, and whatever version, this I think was, I have my Xbox 360 Elite, which is pretty much like a launch console. It came out in 2005, 2006. These came with hard drives. This is a 60 gigabyte one, which is probably ancient, just as old as the damn console. I don't think it came with it, but that was huge. That was huge for when the Xbox came out, especially since downloading games directly from the internet wasn't a huge thing still. So you could cram, at the average of a 4 gigabyte Xbox game, 60 divided by 4, that's 12, 13 games, give or take, especially since the arcade on here has a whole bunch of different size games. And very quickly after release, they came out with bigger hard drives, 120 gigabytes and stuff like that. The PS3 came out with an 80 gigabyte version hard drive. You could fit a couple games, a good almost 20 games on there. With today's hard drives, you get a terabyte and you can't even download 4 or 5 games. That's pretty sad. You'd have to throw everything on an external drive, because those would be cheaper to buy, but the speeds for transferring and loading the games would be so much slower than having built-in storage. It's just things are like counterproductive to today, and we're spending more time loading the damn game than playing the damn game. Unless you load it all at once and you play it in a long ass session. It's just, it baffles me. It baffles me. I don't know how big, hell, I should have even put freaking Red Dead Redemption 2 on here. I don't even know how big that is on the Xbox One. It's coming out on PC. It's probably going to be like 30 more gigabytes for some damn reason, probably just because of higher fidelity textures and all that crap. But this is why SSDs matter more than ever, and with how much they still cost these days per gigabyte, dollar to gigabyte, it sounds like it's like I would love to put on my tin hat and say they're doing this so we can force ourselves to buy more storage for the people so they can buy these things and load them at the speeds they should have felt like they loaded back in the day for games today. It's just all confusing. I'm done. I don't know. I'm done talking about this. The fact that I went on for 30 minutes about talking about game sizes is just, it's amazing, because I never thought I'd be able to talk for this long. But if you made it to the end, I want to give you a pat on the back if I could, because thank you. That's a long time to listen. If you skipped to the end, hey, I get it. 30 minutes is a long time, but a lot of people also like to listen to this stuff. But what do you think about all this crap? Because I think this is bullshit to like the 9th degree, honestly, even though you could justify it with hugely detailed textures, models, shading, blah, 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 blah. I think they need to find better ways to compress this again, because game developers have had a good way of being innovative with their models and their textures by cramming them onto discs that I'm pretty sure they didn't want to cram games to be that small with. I don't know. I mean, I downloaded, and this is going to be my last rant before the end of the video, I downloaded the Unreal Engine dev kit on PC, and I know that comes with some pre-built assets and stuff, but that alone was like 20 gigabytes. And I don't know how much I haven't learned enough to utilize the engine and actually develop it from like the ground up with code and creating assets and importing them. But having like game engines be that big before you even develop a game, I think that's a problem. Unless they're super ultra optimized to run on everything, and that's the reason why they're big, is because they have to accommodate for so much code for so much devices. But you don't. You got the PS3, the PS4, the Xbox One, the PC, and then like mobile. The engine shouldn't be that big to begin with. But whatever. I'm still ranting. I need to talk to some people. So if you like this video and you want to discuss about this stuff, don't forget to like it, comment below. Please tell me what you want to think about it. I want to get everybody's opinion on this. If you watched to the end, I want to give you another pat on the back. I'll hug the damn webcam. Thank you for watching if you did. Don't forget to subscribe if you like my content. Go check some other videos out, or check more about other people ranting, because I'm pretty sure they'll be somewhere over here on the recommendeds. And until next time, Xeno's out, and I'll see you later. When it's a free game to play with. Oh, right in the face. Thanks for the bat, dude. I'm coming to get you. I'm coming to get you.
Oh.
Coming to what?
Oh. Bro, that was so good. You literally came up behind him.